India thought the deal was done. After months of negotiations, quiet handshakes, and whispered promises between top diplomats, the trade agreement with the US seemed sealed, just waiting for Donald Trump's final nod. But then, in less than 24 hours, everything collapsed. Not only did Trump walk away without warning, he slapped India with a brutal double tariff, a move that blindsided New Delhi and rattled the global stage. So what made Trump flip? And why is India now caught in the middle of a global power game involving Russia? Oil and raw political ego? Let me know when you're ready for Section 1, the seemingly perfect deal. Or if it started with a handshake and high hopes. When Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited the White House early in Trump's return to office, it signaled the beginning of what many believed would be a breakthrough in US-India trade relations. Behind closed doors, talks progressed quickly. By July, Indian negotiators were confident. They believed they had a deal. Key figures like Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer had, by all accounts, signed off. The only thing left was President Trump's approval, a final stamp on what seemed like a historic partnership. Even Trump himself told reporters they were very close to making it official. From India's perspective, it was just a matter of days before the announcement would go public. What they didn't know was that everything was about to change. Not gradually, but suddenly, then nothing. The excitement in New Delhi slowly turned into confusion. Days passed, then weeks. Trump, once vocal about the imminent trade deal, stopped mentioning it altogether. Behind the scenes, the focus inside the White House had abruptly shifted to the European Union. The India deal, once a priority, had been shoved aside without explanation. Indian officials waited for the call, the announcement, any sign that the momentum was still alive. But there was no update, only silence. For Indian diplomats, it was baffling. Everything had been lined up. The trade barriers had been reduced, concessions were made, and both sides had negotiated in good faith. But from Trump's inner circle, the message was clear. India's offer wasn't good enough. No official cancellation, no formal rejection, just silence, the kind that signals a storm is coming. That silence didn't last long. When Trump finally responded, he didn't reject the deal quietly. He retaliated loudly. First came a 25% tariff on Indian goods, catching businesses and economists off guard. But just as India began calculating the damage, Trump delivered a second blow, another 25% tariff. This time as punishment for India's continued purchase of Russian oil. The message couldn't have been clearer: comply or pay. With both tariffs combined, Indian exports to the US were suddenly facing a staggering 50% levy. New Delhi was blindsided. After months of negotiation and compromise, they weren't just left without a deal. They were hit with economic penalties that sent shockwaves through Indian markets. What stung even more was the selective targeting. Countries like the European Union and Turkey were also buying Russian energy. But they weren't penalized. Only India got the double strike. And just like that, the optimism of cooperation turned into a diplomatic cold front. To understand why Trump came down so hard, you have to look at oil, specifically Russian oil. Last year, India imported over $52 billion worth of it. For Indian officials, it was a matter of survival. With a population of over 1 billion and growing energy demands, cheap Russian oil helped stabilize inflation and keep the economy moving. But in Trump's eyes, it was something else entirely: defiance. As Russia continued its aggression in Ukraine, Trump viewed every barrel of Russian oil sold abroad as funding for Putin's war machine. And to him, India's ongoing purchases, even if legal, were unacceptable. Trump wanted to make an example out of someone. And India, despite its long-time strategic partnership with the US, became the target. Indian diplomats pushed back, insisting their choices were based on energy security, not politics. But Trump wasn't buying it. And worse, India was watching other nations, like the EU and Turkey, buy Russian energy without facing the same backlash. The hypocrisy was hard to ignore. What began as a trade disagreement was rapidly spiraling into a geopolitical standoff. Behind the headlines and tariffs, a deeper story was playing out, one of mistrust, miscommunication, and bruised egos. Indian officials believed a single phone call between Modi and Trump could have salvaged the deal. They waited, hoping for a direct conversation to reset the course. But that call never came. Why? Because Modi didn't want it. According to insiders, the Indian Prime Minister, known for projecting strength, feared being publicly humiliated. Trump had a reputation for berating foreign leaders, even allies, and Modi wasn't about to risk being the next headline. On the American side, Officials pointed out that Trump had finalized major deals with Japan and South Korea, all without any leader-to-leader calls. So why did India expect special treatment? The answer lies in pride, perception, and politics. Modi's government was already under fire at home, and a public scolding from Trump would have been a political disaster. The result? Total deadlock. No communication. No progress. Just a growing rift between two nations that once called each other strategic allies. And that silence? It was now turning into something much harder to ignore. As tensions with Washington escalated, India quietly started looking elsewhere. And the timing couldn't have been more symbolic. Just days after Trump's tariff bombshell, Brazilian President Lula da Silva picked up the phone and called Modi. His message? It was time for BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to unite against Trump's trade pressure. Behind closed doors, conversations were already brewing. Could BRICS become a counterbalance to U.S. dominance? For years, India had tried to maintain a delicate balancing act, friendly with the West, yet fiercely independent. But with Trump's aggressive tariffs and public silence, that balance was tilting. The idea of leaning deeper into partnerships with Russia and China, once seen as risky, now seemed like a strategic necessity. And for the White House, this was the real cost of pushing too hard. Tariffs might hurt exports, but pushing a powerful economy like India toward rival global powers? That was something far more dangerous. The very alliance the U.S. had spent decades building was now slipping away, one misstep at a time. Publicly, Trump said little, but behind closed doors, his team had already made up their minds. The truth? They didn't think India offered enough. According to insiders close to the administration, when Trump's advisors compared India's proposal to other trade deals, like those with Indonesia, Japan, and South Korea, the difference was stark. Those countries had slashed tariffs to near zero. India, meanwhile, still held on to many of its highest import duties. To Trump, it wasn't a deal. It was a half measure. One official described India's offer as totally insufficient, and from Trump's perspective, accepting it would show weakness. He wanted total wins, not compromises. That's why, even after saying a deal was imminent, he pivoted, fast, toward Europe, toward better numbers, toward countries that gave him what he wanted without resistance. India, with its strategic calculations and slow concessions, simply didn't play by his rules. And in Trump's world, that meant the deal was dead before it ever hit his desk. So where does all this leave two of the world's largest democracies? The trade talks between the U.S. and India are technically still alive, with a looming deadline of August 27th to reach an agreement and possibly avoid the crushing 50% tariffs. But the trust has been deeply shaken. Trump continues to call Modi a friend, keeping lines of communication open. But the damage is clear. After years of effort to build a strong relationship, everything seems to be unraveling in a matter of days. For India, the stakes couldn't be higher. Will they bend to Trump's demands and risk domestic backlash, or will they stand firm, risking economic retaliation but preserving their sovereignty? And for the U.S., the question remains, can any country truly rely on a stable, predictable partnership with an administration